Whispers in the Bell-Witch Cave. There are places that hold weight, not the kind you can measure in pounds or stones, but a heaviness that presses down on you the moment you step close, a gravity born of memory and suffering. The Bell-Witch Cave in Adams, Tennessee, is one of those places. I didn't believe it at first. To me, it was just another roadside curiosity, another story stretched thin by locals who enjoyed scaring tourists. But the night I stepped inside that cave, the weight became real, and I have carried it with me ever since. The land around the cave was ordinary enough at first glance. A scatter of trees stood crooked at the edges, their branches bony and bare despite the time of year. The air smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves, but beneath it was something else, something metallic, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. The cave mouth yawned at the base of a hill, a dark wound in the stone, its edges slick with moisture that gleamed faintly in the fading light. I remember standing at the entrance, staring into that darkness, feeling the damp air brush against my skin like the breath of something waiting inside. My footsteps echoed too loudly as I entered, as if the cave resented my presence, mocking me with each sound I made. The ground was uneven, slick with mud and sharp rocks that bit into the soles of my shoes. Water dripped from the ceiling at irregular intervals, each drop striking with a hollow sound that made the silence between them heavier. The walls closed in quickly, rough stone pressing close to my shoulders, their surfaces cold and wet. My flashlight beam cut a narrow path ahead, but the shadows clung stubbornly at the edges, refusing to give way. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell became. Not just dampness, but something older, fouler, like rot sealed away in the dark for centuries. The air felt thick, filling my lungs with every breath like I was swallowing the cave itself. My chest tightened, my ears strained. The silence was alive. That's when I first heard it. A whisper. So faint I thought at first it was my imagination, the sound of air pushing through cracks in the stone. But the more I listened, the more certain I became. It had rhythm, cadence, something human woven through the hiss of air. The voice was not above me, not beside me, but all around, as though the cave itself had leaned close to speak. I froze, pressing my back against the damp wall. The stone was slick and cold, leaching the heat from my body. My light shook in my hand, the beam stuttering across jagged rock, catching pools of water that gleamed like eyes staring back at me. The whisper came again, louder, closer. It wasn't words I could understand, not fully. The syllables bent and twisted, sliding past my ears without catching, yet my mind seemed to fill in the blanks. The meaning pressed in despite the incomprehensible shape of the sound. A warning, a command, something old and impatient telling me to leave. I wanted to run. My body screamed to turn back, to claw my way toward the fading light of the entrance. But the cave seemed to resist me. The air thickened, and each step forward felt easier than each step back. The weight grew heavier, dragging me deeper into its throat. The passage narrowed. The walls pressed closer until my shoulders brushed damp stone on either side. The smell of rot intensified, tinged with sulfur, burning my nostrils. My flashlight beam faltered against a sudden draft, flickering as if something unseen had passed directly in front of it. My skin prickled, the tiny hairs on my arms lifting as though I had brushed against static. And then I heard laughter. It wasn't loud. It wasn't joyous. It was a brittle, fractured sound that scraped along the walls and burrowed into my skull. It came from ahead, echoing in the darkness where my light could not reach. The sound seemed to crawl under my skin, each note cold and sharp, filling me with the certainty that whatever produced it was not human. I moved forward, though every step felt stolen, borrowed against a debt I didn't understand. The cave floor sloped downward, slick with unseen moisture. My hand trailed the wall for balance, the stone rough and jagged beneath my fingertips. The whisper returned, louder now, overlapping itself, as though more than one voice spoke at once. The words became clearer. They weren't asking. They weren't warning. They were mocking me. The cave tightened again, forcing me to duck low, my body folding into the earth's throat. The air was colder here, the kind of cold that didn't just brush the skin but sank into it, settling deep into bone. My breath came visible, fogging in front of me, and in that fog I thought I saw shapes, faces forming, fading, reforming. Their eyes hollow, their mouths stretched wide in silent screams. My flashlight beam flickered again, and in that stutter of light, I saw movement. Something shifted at the edge of vision, pulling itself back just beyond the glow. Pale, thin, too fast for me to catch. I froze, straining my ears. The whisper was all around now, overlapping, hundreds of voices pressed into one constant stream, too loud to be ignored, too soft to be fully understood. My knees trembled, and my hand tightened on the flashlight, knuckles white against the plastic. The laughter came again, closer, right beside my ear. I turned, jerking the beam toward the sound, but the light caught nothing but slick stone. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out the whispers for a moment, until they surged louder, angry, insistent. The cave itself seemed to shake with them, as though the walls were breathing, pulsing alive. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. Silence. But not empty silence. This silence was swollen, bloated, filled with the weight of something holding its breath, waiting. My own breathing sounded alien, too loud, invasive. The cave didn't want me here. I stumbled backward, my shoulders striking jagged rock, tearing fabric, scraping skin. The pain barely registered. My eyes locked on the darkness ahead, waiting for the shape I knew was there, the shape that had pulled me this far inside. But it never revealed itself. Instead, the whisper returned, low and soft, curling around me like smoke. Only this time I understood it. It spoke my name. The sound was drawn out, stretched thin, my name twisting in a mouth that didn't know how to form it. Hearing it spoken in that place, in that voice, hollowed me out. My body responded before my mind did. I ran. The cave seemed longer on the way out, the walls closing tighter, the air pressing harder. My light shook wildly, bouncing across stone and shadow, illuminating faces where there were none, hands reaching from cracks too narrow to hold them. I tripped, stumbled, cut my palms against sharp stone, but I didn't stop. The entrance appeared at last, a pale smear of light far ahead, smaller than I remembered, as if the cave was swallowing it. I pushed harder, lungs burning, throat raw with cold air. The whispers followed, rising to a frenzy, overlapping in a tide of sound that threatened to drown me. I burst into the open air, collapsing against the damp earth outside. The night sky above felt unreal, too wide, too bright after the suffocating dark. My chest heaved, my body trembling with exhaustion. Behind me, the cave mouth gaped silently, its edges slick with moonlight. No sound came from within. No whispers, no laughter, only the silence of stone. But the silence felt wrong. It felt like a promise. I left Adams the next day. I never told anyone what I heard, what I saw. But sometimes at night, when the house is still and the air feels heavy, I hear it again. My name, whispered just at the edge of hearing, curling through the dark like smoke. And I know the cave hasn't finished with me. The fifth floor of Waverly Hills. There are buildings that seem to breathe. Their walls creak with a rhythm too measured to be explained by settling beams or shifting stone. Their windows gape like eyes, and their hallways stretch like veins. Waverly Hills Sanatorium is one of those buildings, and if you stand still long enough within its walls, you begin to feel as though you are inside something alive. I had heard the stories for years, how thousands had died there when tuberculosis ravaged Kentucky, how patients had been wheeled along the death tunnel beneath the hospital, how shadows still roamed the halls decades after the last bed was emptied. But it wasn't until I joined one of the tours in the early 2000s, when they had just begun letting people inside again, that the place became real to me. The night was heavy with humidity when I arrived. The building loomed against the sky, its brick walls blotched and scarred, windows hollow and lifeless. The trees around it leaned inward, as if drawn to the rot that still lingered in its bones. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something sharper, metallic, like the tang of blood dried long ago but never forgotten. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The air was damp, clinging to my skin, filling my lungs with a weight that grew heavier the deeper I walked. The walls peeled with layers of paint, curling downward like withered skin. Every sound carried too far, footsteps echoing endlessly, the faint drip of water magnified into something oppressive. The guide led us floor by floor, recounting the history with a rehearsed tone, but I barely listened. My attention was on the silence that filled the spaces between his words. The shadows seemed too thick in the corners, lingering longer than the reach of our flashlights. Dust floated like ash in the air, disturbed by our breath, as though the place resented being stirred awake. It wasn't until we reached the fifth floor that I felt it. That floor was different. The moment we climbed the stairs, a heaviness settled over me. My chest tightened, my vision swam slightly, as though the air itself carried something poisonous. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with doorways that yawned open into rooms where the walls seemed to bow inward, suffocating the space. The paint was darker here, stained with water damage that looked like spreading bruises. I lagged behind the group, drawn toward the doorway at the far end of the hall. Room 502. I had read about it before, the nurse who had taken her own life there, her body found hanging from a pipe in the ceiling. They said she was pregnant, unmarried, and broken by the shame of it. Some believed her despair lingered still, trapped within those walls. The room was colder than the hallway. A stale odor hung in the air, a mix of mildew and something acrid, like old antiseptic that never faded. The walls were mottled with peeling layers, the ceiling stained with dark watermarks. The floor was uneven beneath my feet, gritty with dirt and fragments of plaster. As I stood there, the air shifted. Not a breeze. There was no movement of air at all in that place. It was something else, something heavier, pressing down on me from above. My ears rang with a faint, high-pitched hum, so soft I couldn't be sure it wasn't inside my head. Then came the whisper. It rose from the corner of the room, low and fragmented, as though scraped across stone before reaching my ears. It wasn't clear enough to understand, but its tone carried urgency, a sound that burrowed beneath the skin. My stomach knotted. My hands trembled. The beam of my flashlight shook as I swept it across the walls. Nothing. But the whisper continued, circling me, threading through the air like smoke. It swelled and collapsed, louder one moment, softer the next, never vanishing completely. My breath came fast, fogging in front of me despite the stagnant air. The ceiling groaned above me. The old pipe stretched across it rattled, shifting slightly, though no hand touched it. The sound reverberated through the room, sharp and metallic, echoing like a scream without breath. My throat tightened. My knees weakened. The stories of the nurse returned unbidden, images of her swaying from that very pipe, her body turning slowly in the stale air of this room. The whisper rose again, louder now, layered, as though more than one voice spoke at once. I pressed my hands against my ears, but the sound bypassed them, vibrating inside my skull. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming and flaring like a heartbeat, and in that faltering light, I saw it. A figure stood in the far corner, pale, thin, hanging just inches above the floor. Its head tilted forward, hair hanging in lank strands, face obscured in shadow. The body swayed gently, side to side, as if caught in a current that did not exist. My lungs seized. My legs refused to move. The whispering became laughter, soft, broken, brittle, rising from the walls, from the ceiling, from inside me. The figure's head lifted, and the face was hollow. Eyes black and endless, mouth stretched too wide, too wrong, a void tearing through the pale skin. The swaying grew faster, violent, as though the body strained against whatever held it suspended. The laughter cut off, replaced by a sudden silence so absolute it rang in my ears. Then the body dropped. It hit the floor with no sound, no weight, vanishing the instant it should have struck. The silence shattered into whispers again, dozens of them, each one threading into the next until the room was suffocating with them. The pipe above rattled furiously, shaking dust loose that rained down across my shoulders. I stumbled backward into the hall, nearly colliding with the group. The guide's voice cut faintly through the ringing in my ears, but I couldn't process the words. My eyes stayed locked on the open doorway, on the shadows that seemed to ripple just beyond the threshold, moving in ways shadows should not. For the rest of the tour, I spoke to no one. I stayed close to the exit, my skin crawling, the whispers clinging to me like damp cloth. When I finally stepped outside, the night air hit me like a wave, sharp and fresh compared to the suffocating heaviness of that floor. Yet even in the open, I couldn't shake the weight. My ears still rang. My chest still ached with the pressure. And when I closed my eyes, I still saw that swaying body, suspended from nothing, waiting in the dark. It has been years since I stepped foot inside Waverly Hills, but I cannot shake it. At night, when the house grows still, I sometimes hear the faint rattle of metal above me, as though a pipe is shifting in the ceiling. And beneath that, softer but undeniable, comes the whisper. Not words, not warnings, just the sound of breath, too close, too steady, too patient, waiting for me to return to the 5th floor.